She was still a child when the world decided her future. While other girls her age were busy playing with dolls, dressing them up, and living in the simple joys of childhood, she was told something that would change her life forever. They told her she was to become a wife. The words did not make sense to her at first. She was too young to fully understand what it meant, but she could feel the heaviness in the way people around her spoke. She could feel the pressure in their voices, and deep inside, fear began to grow. Childhood, which should have been filled with games, laughter, and innocence, was suddenly cut short. Her small hands, hands that were meant to hold toys, books, or the gentle touch of her parents, were now expected to carry responsibilities far too heavy for her age. These hands, so tiny and delicate, trembled at the thought of stepping into a world she did not yet know. Adulthood is heavy even for those who are ready, but for her, it was a mountain placed on fragile shoulders. She could not imagine cooking, cleaning, serving, or carrying the duties of a wife. She was still learning the basics of life, still innocent to the realities of the world. Yet, others expected her to leave her dolls behind and enter into a life that demanded maturity, sacrifice, and strength she did not yet have. The fear inside her was not just about marriage, it was about losing herself. It was about losing the freedom to play, to dream, and to grow slowly, the way every child deserves. Instead, she was being rushed into a role she had not chosen. Her hands trembled because deep down, she knew that once she crossed that line, her childhood would be gone forever. She would have to trade innocence for responsibility, laughter for silence, and play for survival. When she looked at her dolls, sitting quietly where she had left them, tears filled her eyes. Those dolls were not just toys. They were her friends, her companions, the little world she controlled with her imagination. Through them, she had lived stories of happiness, comfort, and safety. But now, she was being told to abandon them, to set aside her little world of innocence, and step into a life where imagination could no longer protect her. The adults around her may not have noticed, or maybe they chose not to notice, the fear in her trembling hands. To them, this was normal. To them, she was ready. But to her, it felt like being pushed into a storm without shelter. She wanted to scream, to cry, to tell them she was not ready. Yet, her voice was small, and her silence was taken as agreement. Her body shook with fear because she could not find the courage or the space to say no. It is a cruel thing when childhood is stolen, when a girl is forced to grow up too quickly. She had not yet learned who she truly was, but she was being told to belong to someone else. She had not yet discovered her dreams, but her future was being decided by others. That is why her hands trembled, not just from fear, but from the deep sadness of losing a life she had not even lived yet. Adulthood is a weight that requires time to prepare for. It requires maturity, strength, and self-understanding. But for her, all of that was rushed. Her hands, too small, were expected to hold responsibilities far larger than she could carry. The trembling in her hands was the trembling of a child forced to step into shoes too big, a child who still longed for play but was handed duty instead. She was still a little girl, still a child who should have been protected, loved, and allowed to grow slowly. But in that moment, as they told her she would become a wife, she felt the weight of adulthood pressing down on her. She was afraid, not because she did not want to love or care, but because she was not ready. Her hands trembled with fear, and in that trembling was the truth. She was still a child who had been asked to carry the world far too soon. The elders spoke with a kind of pride that filled the room. Their voices carried authority, and their words were heavy, as though they were announcing something to be celebrated. "You will marry a good man," they told her, and they believed, with full certainty, that what they were saying was a blessing. To them, it was an honor, a privilege, something every young girl should dream of. They repeated those words with smiles, nodding to each other as though they had just secured the brightest future for her. In their eyes, this was a gift, an achievement, something to be grateful for. But inside her heart, the same words sounded entirely different. To her, it did not feel like a blessing at all. It felt like a sentence, like the closing of a door, like the end of something she had not yet even started. While the elders saw pride and tradition, she felt fear and loss. She was still a child, still someone who should have been allowed to dream, to grow, and to discover life step by step. Yet, with those words, her path was sealed. She was told she would marry, not asked if she wanted to. Her voice did not matter. Her wishes, her dreams, and her innocence were not considered. All that mattered was the pride of the elders and the weight of tradition. The phrase, "a good man," meant nothing to her. She did not know who he was. She did not know what he looked like, how he spoke, or what kind of life he would give her. The words were empty in her ears because they did not speak of love, of choice, or of happiness. They spoke only of duty. She was expected to smile, to nod, and to accept the decision with gratitude. But deep down, she could not understand why something that felt so frightening was being celebrated as a blessing. In her heart, she felt trapped. She felt as though she had been sentenced to a life she had not chosen. It was not freedom, it was confinement. It was not joy, it was the end of joy. She thought of her childhood, of playing with dolls, of running in the fields, of laughing freely without the burden of responsibility. And now, all of it was being taken away. With one sentence, spoken proudly by the elders, her entire life was being redirected, reshaped, and handed over to someone she had never even met. The pride in their voices made it harder for her to resist. She wanted to cry, to scream, to say, "I am not ready. I do not want this." But how could she? They were elders. They spoke with certainty, and in their minds, they were doing what was best for her. Tradition had taught them that this was the right path, and questioning it would mean disrespect. So, she stayed silent, though her heart screamed louder than her voice ever could. The weight of their words pressed on her chest. It was suffocating. To them, a good man meant security, honor, and stability. But to her, it meant the loss of childhood, the loss of choice, and the loss of freedom. It meant stepping into a role she was not ready for, carrying responsibilities too heavy for her small hands, and living a life designed not by her, but for her. She wondered if they could see the fear in her eyes. She wondered if they noticed her trembling hands, her quiet unease, her silence that was not acceptance but helplessness. Maybe they did, or maybe they chose not to. They preferred the comfort of tradition, the pride of believing they had done something honorable. To them, her fear was invisible, her silence was agreement, and her tears, if they came, would be dismissed as childish weakness. In that moment, she realized how different their world was from hers. They saw honor, she saw a prison. They saw blessing, she saw punishment. They saw a future, she saw the end of her freedom. And as she stood there, hearing the words again, "You will marry a good man," she felt the truth sink deeper into her heart. This was not a blessing for her. This was a sentence. And no amount of their pride could change how heavy those words felt inside her. She turned to her mother in fear, her small voice shaking as she whispered words that revealed her innocence. "But Mama, my period hasn't even started yet. Does that mean I am ready?" In those few words, her entire childhood was revealed. She was still a girl, not yet a woman. Her body had not even begun the natural changes that mark the start of womanhood, and yet here she was, being told she was ready to become a wife. The question carried both confusion and desperation. She was too young to understand the full meaning of marriage, but old enough to sense that something was deeply wrong. Tears filled her eyes as she spoke, tears not only of fear but also of helplessness. She was not asking about marriage with excitement or joy. She was pleading, hoping that her mother would see her as the child she still was. She wanted her mother to stop the tide of decisions crashing over her life. She wanted reassurance that she was not ready, that she should not yet carry the weight of adulthood. She hoped that her mother, the one person she trusted most, would protect her. But her whisper went unheard. Or rather, it was heard but not acknowledged. The room was filled with decisions already made, traditions already followed, and pride that left no space for her voice. The elders had spoken, and their word was final. Her tears, her trembling voice, her confession of being too young, none of it seemed to matter. They brushed past her fears as if they were nothing more than the worries of a child. But that was exactly the truth. She was still a child. Her mother, torn between love for her daughter and the weight of tradition, remained silent. Perhaps she wanted to hold her, to wipe her tears and say, "No, my child, you are not ready. You should still be playing, laughing, and learning." But fear of society's judgment kept her quiet. In that silence, the girl's heart broke further, because if even her mother would not defend her, then who would? Her tears kept rising, her chest heavy with a pain she could not put into words. The thought of leaving her dolls, her childhood games, and the safety of her home made her feel like she was being pushed off a cliff with no one to catch her. She had not even experienced the natural step of becoming a woman, and yet they were forcing her into roles far beyond her body and mind's capacity. It was unfair, cruel, and devastating. The whisper to her mother was not just a question about her readiness, it was a cry for help. It was her last attempt to remind them that she was still a child. But no one listened. No one wanted to hear. To the elders, readiness was not measured by age, growth, or emotional maturity. Readiness was simply declared when they said so. And so, her tears were ignored, her fears dismissed, and her words lost in the noise of tradition and pride. For her, the silence that followed was unbearable. She realized that her body's truth, her still innocent state, did not matter to them. Her voice, soft and trembling, did not matter to them. Her tears, wet and shining, did not matter either. What mattered to them was their own belief that they had secured her future. But to her, it felt like they had stolen it. She sat quietly after that, the tears spilling down her cheeks, her heart pounding with fear. In that moment, she felt smaller than ever, powerless against the decisions of the adults around her. She did not yet understand the full weight of marriage, but she understood enough to know that her childhood was ending before it had truly begun. Her whisper lingered in the air, though no one acknowledged it. "But Mama, my period hasn't even started yet. Does that mean I am ready?" It was the question of a child forced to face something she could not understand. It was the desperate plea of innocence trying to defend itself. And though no one listened, her words told the truth more loudly than any speech ever could. She was not ready. Not in body, not in mind, and not in heart. But the tragedy was that her truth was ignored, leaving her to walk into a future that belonged to others, not to her. They dressed her in silk and jewels, calling her a bride. Everyone around her seemed proud and joyful, clapping their hands, praising how beautiful she looked. To them, the shiny fabric and glittering ornaments were symbols of honor, respect, and celebration. They saw her as the centerpiece of a grand event, someone to admire and praise. But for her, the experience was very different. The soft silk that touched her skin did not feel like comfort. Instead, it felt heavy, suffocating, and strange. The jewelry that sparkled on her neck and arms was not a gift of beauty, but a set of chains that weighed her down. She was still a little girl at heart, someone who should have been running in open fields, laughing with friends, or sitting with her dolls. Instead, she was wrapped in clothes meant for a woman, clothes that carried responsibilities she did not understand. Each jewel placed on her body reminded her that her freedom was slipping away. Every layer of silk seemed to push her further from the child she still was. She did not feel like a bride, she felt like a prisoner dressed for display. The room buzzed with excitement. Elders admired the way she looked, saying things like, "She looks so grown up," or, "She is ready to start a new life." But their words cut into her heart. She knew she was not grown up, not ready, and certainly not prepared for the new life they spoke of. The truth was simple. She still felt like a little girl pretending to be someone else. But in this play, she had no choice in her role. The silk wrapped around her body felt like a net catching her, trapping her in a life she did not choose. The jewels around her wrists clinked together with every small movement, reminding her that she was no longer free to move as she pleased. Even the heavy earrings that tugged at her ears seemed to whisper that she was bound to responsibilities too big for her tiny shoulders. Inside, she wanted to scream, "Take this off! I am not ready. I am still a child." But her lips stayed closed. Around her, everyone's faces were filled with smiles, joy, and pride. No one noticed the tears that threatened to spill from her eyes. To them, she was glowing like a bride. To her, she was breaking inside. As she looked into the mirror, she barely recognized the reflection staring back. The girl who once had messy hair from playing outside, who loved to giggle and chase butterflies, was gone. In her place stood someone covered in layers of fabric and gold, someone who looked older, but was not older at all. She wanted to reach through the mirror and pull that little girl back, to hold on to the innocence that was being stolen from her. But the reflection did not change. It told her the truth. Childhood was slipping away, and no one cared enough to stop it. The silk and jewels that others saw as beauty were, to her, heavy symbols of loss. They did not represent joy. They represented the end of her freedom, the silencing of her laughter, and the beginning of a path she was too young to walk. Each piece of jewelry felt like another link in a chain dragging her forward into a world of adulthood she had not asked for. She sat quietly as the women around her continued to adjust her dress and comment on her beauty. They spoke about the feast, the guests, the music, and the future. But inside her head, all she could hear was a single voice, her own, whispering in fear, "I am not ready. Please, I am still a little girl." Yet, her voice was drowned out by the noise of celebration. No one noticed her silence. No one asked what she felt. They only saw the bride they wanted to see. And so, she remained there, dressed in silk and jewels, her heart heavy, her spirit crushed, and her childhood slipping away with every passing moment. To the world, she was a bride. To herself, she was a little girl trapped in a costume far too heavy to bear. And those silks and jewels, which sparkled so brightly to others, would forever remain in her memory not as treasures, but as chains. While others danced, she sat in silence, her heart pounding. Around her, the room was full of music and laughter. The guests clapped their hands, the drums beat loudly, and the women swayed in rhythm, their colorful dresses spinning like flowers in the wind. To anyone looking from the outside, it was a scene of celebration and joy. But inside her chest, joy was the last thing she felt. Her heart raced, not with excitement but with fear. She sat quietly, trying to shrink into the corner, hoping no one would notice her trembling hands. Her young eyes scanned the room, but instead of seeing the smiles and laughter, she only saw the walls closing in. Everyone else seemed to be celebrating love, but she was not thinking about love at all. She was thinking about escape. Each beat of the drum reminded her of the time slipping away. With every clap of the dancers' hands, her future seemed to march closer, one she did not want and had no strength to stop. She was surrounded by people who believed they were giving her happiness, but in her heart, she felt trapped. The songs, the dances, the laughter, none of it touched her. Instead, it all felt like noise that drowned out the cry of her soul. Her thoughts raced as quickly as her heart beat. She imagined running out the door, leaving the heavy clothes and jewelry behind, feeling the cool night air on her face. She imagined her small feet carrying her far away from the noise, away from the expectations, away from the fate they were forcing on her. For just a moment, the thought of escape gave her a sense of freedom. But then reality returned, crushing her hope. Where would she go? Who would protect her? She was just a child, and the world outside could be even harsher than the world inside this hall. Still, the idea of escape refused to leave her mind. While the women twirled on the dance floor, she twirled through her thoughts, spinning through possibilities. Maybe she could hide. Maybe she could run to a relative who might listen. Maybe, just maybe, she could find someone who cared enough to save her. But each possibility felt impossible. The walls seemed too high, the doors too guarded, the people too blind to her suffering. As the music grew louder, her silence grew deeper. No one noticed that the bride-to-be was not smiling, not celebrating. They were too busy enjoying themselves, too proud of the occasion. To them, her quietness might have looked like shyness. But it was not shyness. It was the silence of a child suffocating under pressure, the silence of someone too small to carry the burden placed upon her. She hugged her knees under the folds of her dress, trying to calm her racing heart. But the more she tried to quiet herself, the more the fear rose. Her body knew what her mind could not fully explain. She was not ready, not safe, not willing. And yet, no one asked. No one cared to ask. They assumed she was fine, because she looked beautiful, because the ceremony was grand, because tradition had been followed. Her silence became her only shield. She did not clap, she did not sing, she did not dance. She sat still, her mind screaming for freedom while her lips said nothing. She thought of the little girl she used to be, running barefoot in the yard, laughing freely under the sun. Where had that girl gone? She was still here, buried under silk and jewels, buried under expectations, buried under fear. The people around her danced for love, but her heart danced for escape. Her mind created secret paths, imaginary doors, invisible wings that might carry her away. She was too young to know what love really meant, but she was old enough to understand what freedom felt like. And in that moment, freedom was the only thing she longed for. While others celebrated the union they believed was a blessing, she sat in silence, knowing it felt more like a prison. Her pounding heart was not the beat of joy, it was the beat of desperation. She was not daydreaming of romance or a happy future. She was thinking of running, of hiding, of breaking free from the chains that were tightening around her. And so, while the room spun with music and laughter, she remained still, a silent child among celebrating adults, carrying a truth too heavy for her small frame. She did not want this life. She wanted escape. Her husband wasn't cruel, but he was a stranger. That truth lived in her heart from the very first day. People around her whispered words like lucky and blessed, saying she had been given a good man. They described him as gentle, respectful, and honorable. And perhaps he was all those things. He did not raise his voice at her. He did not treat her with anger. But none of that changed the simple fact that he was not a friend, not a companion, not someone she knew. He was a stranger who had suddenly been placed at the center of her world. When he looked at her, she lowered her eyes, not from shyness alone but from discomfort. When he spoke, his words felt heavy, falling into a space that had not yet been built between them. She was too young to understand his tone, too young to reply with confidence, too young to even know what was expected of her. Every moment she spent with him reminded her of how different their worlds were. He belonged to adulthood, with its responsibilities and desires, while she still belonged to childhood, with its innocence and play. And then came the touches. He reached out his hand gently, perhaps thinking he was showing kindness, perhaps believing he was offering love. But to her, every touch felt wrong. Not because he was unkind, but because her body and heart were not ready. She was still a child, and those touches stole pieces of the innocence she should have been allowed to keep. She did not have the words to explain this to him, nor would anyone have listened if she tried. So, she kept the truth locked inside. Each touch felt like the theft of something precious. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, her heart pounding. The silence of the room felt too loud, the distance between them too sharp. She wanted to curl into herself, to protect the little girl still living inside her, but she couldn't. She was expected to share her space, her body, her life with a man she barely knew. The world called it marriage. She called it loss. She thought often of her dolls, still waiting for her in the corner of her old room. She thought of the games she used to play with her friends, the laughter that once came so easily. Now, laughter felt impossible. How could she laugh when she carried the weight of something she never asked for? How could she smile when every touch reminded her that her choices had been stolen? Her husband may not have been cruel, but the situation itself was. It was cruel to take a child and place her in a woman's role. It was cruel to expect her to give what she did not even understand. It was cruel to confuse silence with consent, and obedience with acceptance. She was quiet, yes, but her quiet was not agreement. It was the silence of someone trapped, the silence of someone too small to fight back. Every time he reached for her hand, she wished she could pull away. Every time he tried to speak of a future together, she wished she could tell him that her future had been stolen before it even began. He might not have intended harm, but harm was happening all the same. Each day with him took another piece of her childhood, leaving behind an emptiness she could not fill. To others, their marriage looked ordinary. Neighbors nodded in approval. Relatives praised her for adjusting well. No one asked her how she felt. No one wanted to know. They only saw what they wanted to see, a quiet girl beside a good man. But behind that image was a truth too painful to acknowledge. She was not a wife. She was a child pretending to be one, forced into a role her heart and body could not carry. The cruelest part was that she could not blame him entirely. He was kind in his way, patient in his way. But none of his kindness changed the fact that she had never chosen this life. He was still a stranger, and strangers should not have such power over a child's body, over a child's soul. In her heart, she knew that love could not grow in a soil where freedom had been taken away. She knew that no silk dress, no golden jewelry, no approving words from elders could change the truth. She was not ready. And so, every touch felt like theft, a robbery of the innocence she still carried inside. Her husband wasn't cruel, but that did not make her fate kind. The night she became a wife, she also lost something she could never get back. To the people around her, that night was the beginning of a new chapter, a night of celebration, pride, and tradition. They believed she was stepping into womanhood, into honor, into the role of a wife. But for her, it felt like the ending of something far more precious. It was the night when her childhood, her freedom, and her trust in the world slipped away. They had told her for weeks that this was a blessing, that she should feel lucky, that every girl dreamed of this day. They dressed her in silk, placed jewels on her arms, and smiled as if they were giving her the greatest gift. But when the music faded, the laughter stopped, and the doors closed behind her, the truth became clear. This was not a gift. It was a loss so deep it would echo inside her forever. It was not only her innocence that was taken from her that night. Innocence, after all, might fade naturally with age and experience. But trust is something that a child should carry with her as she grows. A child should be able to believe in her parents, her family, her elders, and her community. She should feel safe knowing that the people who surround her will protect her. But that night, all of that broke apart. She realized, with a crushing weight, that the very people who were supposed to protect her were the ones who had handed her over. They had smiled as they placed her in a room she did not choose. They had called it love when, in truth, it felt like betrayal. The elders who spoke of blessings, the relatives who praised her beauty, even her own parents who stayed silent, none of them had seen the child inside her crying for freedom. None of them had listened when her voice trembled with fear. And because of that, her trust in them shattered. When her husband reached for her that night, she froze. He was not cruel, not violent, but he was still a stranger. She did not know him, did not understand him, and yet he was given the right to touch parts of her life that she was not ready to share. Every touch reminded her that she was powerless, that her body was no longer hers. And with each moment, she felt something important slipping away. It was not just her childhood. It was her belief that the world was safe, that adults made choices to protect her. She lay awake long after the room grew silent, staring at the ceiling, her heart aching in ways she could not put into words. She thought of her old life, of playing in the yard, of running barefoot through the grass, of sitting beside her mother with laughter bubbling in her throat. Those moments now felt like dreams from another world. That little girl, the one who once believed in joy and safety, was gone. In her place was someone who knew too much pain for her age, someone who no longer trusted the promises of love and protection. The deepest wound was not the loss of innocence, though that alone was painful. It was the loss of trust. She could no longer look at her family the same way. Their smiles felt hollow, their blessings bitter. She could no longer believe in the words of the elders, because their wisdom had led her into chains. She could no longer trust the world to keep her safe, because the world had celebrated her loss as if it were an achievement. That night, something invisible broke inside her. It was not a sound anyone else could hear, not a sight anyone else could see. But she felt it clearly. It was the sound of a child's heart breaking, the sight of innocence shattering, the weight of betrayal pressing down. And she knew, even as tears slipped quietly down her face, that this was something she could never get back. As the dawn began to rise, the world outside celebrated a new day. But for her, the light of trust had gone dark. She carried the silence of that night inside her, a silence heavier than any chain. And though she was still alive, still breathing, something essential within her had died. The night she became a wife was the same night she stopped believing in the safety of the world around her. It was the night she learned that innocence can be stolen, and trust, once broken, may never be repaired. She smiled in public, because that's what brides were supposed to do. Every time she stepped out, surrounded by relatives and neighbors, her lips curved into the shape of happiness. People looked at her, nodded approvingly, and whispered about how beautiful she was, how lucky she must feel, how proud her family should be. The smile on her face convinced them that everything was perfect. That smile became her mask, her armor, her way of hiding the storm that raged inside her heart. During the day, she played the role expected of her. She greeted the guests politely, she walked beside her husband quietly, and she accepted compliments with a lowered gaze. Everyone thought she was shy, innocent, and adjusting well to her new life. But what no one saw was that her smile was not real joy. It was duty. It was performance. It was the only way to survive in a world where no one cared to know what she truly felt. But at night, when the noise of the day faded and the house grew still, her mask fell away. In the darkness, she no longer had to pretend. She lay on her bed, clutching her pillow tightly, and allowed the tears she had held back all day to finally flow. Her pillow became her secret witness, the only one who heard her cries, the only one who knew the truth. Night after night, it soaked up the grief she was not allowed to show. Her sobs were muffled, pressed into the fabric, because even then she feared being heard. What if someone discovered her tears? They would call her ungrateful, they would tell her she was blessed, they would remind her that many girls dreamed of what she had. But she knew the truth. Her heart was breaking, and no one wanted to listen. So, she cried silently, pouring her pain into the only safe place she had, her pillow. The contrast between day and night tore at her soul. By day, she was a picture of beauty, grace, and obedience. By night, she was a child again, weeping for the toys she had left behind, for the freedom she had lost, for the innocence taken too soon. The same pillow that held her head also carried her secrets. With every tear, she whispered her pain into it, as if begging it to keep her safe, as if hoping it could hold her shattered pieces together. Her smile in public fooled everyone. They saw a young bride glowing with happiness, never realizing that her glow was forced, that her eyes told a story her lips refused to reveal. She wanted to scream the truth, that she was not happy, that she was not ready, that she felt more like a prisoner than a wife. But she had learned quickly that no one wanted to hear such truths. People preferred the lie of her smile over the reality of her tears. At times, she wondered if this double life would ever end. Would she always have to smile in the sunlight and cry in the dark? Would anyone ever ask her how she truly felt, and mean it? Or would she spend her whole life pretending, hiding her sorrow beneath silks and jewelry, behind smiles and lowered eyes? The thought scared her, because each night her pillow grew heavier with tears, and each day her smile grew harder to wear. Her pillow, soaked night after night, became a symbol of her hidden pain. It knew her better than her husband, better than her family, better than her friends. It carried the soundless cries of a girl trapped in a life she had not chosen. And while others praised her for being a good bride, for looking beautiful, for smiling politely, only she and her pillow knew that those smiles were lies stitched together by survival. The saddest part was that her tears never changed anything. The next morning, she still had to rise, wash her face, and wear her smile again. The cycle continued, a day of pretending followed by a night of breaking. Her soul was caught between these two worlds, torn by the weight of expectations and the silence of her suffering. She smiled in public because she had to. But in the privacy of the night, her pillow heard the truth. It soaked up her pain, carrying the cries that no one wanted to hear, cries that belonged not to a happy bride, but to a little girl still begging to be free. They expected her to cook, to serve, to bear children. From the very first day she entered her husband's home, these were the roles placed on her shoulders. Relatives spoke proudly about how she would now take care of a household. They said it with smiles, as if it were an honor. The older women whispered instructions in her ear, how to prepare meals, how to serve her husband, how to act modest and obedient. They spoke of her duties as though they were natural, as though she had been born ready for them. But she was not ready. She was still a child who had barely learned how to care for herself. Her hands were small, more used to holding dolls than kneading dough. Her mind still wandered toward play, laughter, and learning. And yet, everyone expected her to step into the shoes of a grown woman overnight. They wanted her to become a wife, a caretaker, and soon, a mother. The word mother frightened her most of all. It was whispered into her ears like a sacred duty, a responsibility she was meant to carry proudly. But in her heart, the word felt like a weight too heavy to even imagine. How could she be a mother when she hadn't even finished being a child? How could she raise another life when she was still trying to understand her own? The thought made her tremble. A mother was supposed to be strong, wise, nurturing. A mother was supposed to guide her children, teach them right from wrong, comfort them when they cried, and protect them from the harshness of the world. But how could she do that when she herself still longed for the comfort of her own mother? How could she guide anyone when she was still lost? Her body had not yet grown fully into womanhood, and her mind was even further behind. She did not understand the full meaning of marriage, let alone the greater responsibility of motherhood. Yet, the pressure never stopped. The women of the family teased her gently, saying, "Soon, you will have a baby in your arms." The men smiled proudly, hinting at the future generations she was expected to bring. And every time they spoke those words, her heart sank deeper into despair. At night, when she lay alone with her thoughts, the fear consumed her. She imagined herself holding a child, but instead of feeling joy, she felt panic. How could she care for someone else when she still needed care herself? She remembered the games she used to play, the lessons she had yet to learn, the books she had wanted to read. All of it was left unfinished, cut short by a destiny forced upon her. She wanted to scream the truth. I am not ready. I am not a woman. I am still a girl. But no one would listen. To them, readiness was not about age, growth, or understanding. Readiness was simply declared by tradition, by the marriage ceremony, by the expectations of society. And so, even though she still felt like a child inside, the world now demanded she become a mother. The cruel irony burned inside her. They wanted her to create life, to nurture and protect, when they themselves had failed to protect her. They had thrown her into adulthood unprepared, and yet they expected her to raise children with wisdom and strength. How could she give what she had never received? How could she teach a child about safety and love when those very things had been taken from her? Each day, as she cooked meals she barely knew how to prepare and served people with trembling hands, the fear of motherhood grew stronger. It hung over her like a shadow, a constant reminder of the impossible task that lay ahead. She wished someone, anyone, would look into her eyes and see the truth. She wished someone would say, "You are still a child. You are not ready." But instead, they only pushed her forward, blind to her suffering. Her silence became her only shield. She nodded when they spoke of children, but inside she screamed. She smiled when they teased her, but inside she cried. To the world, she was a wife and soon-to-be mother. But in her heart, she was a child still longing for freedom, for laughter, for the chance to grow at her own pace. How could she be a mother when she hadn't even learned what it meant to be a woman? That question echoed inside her like a wound that never healed. It was not just a question. It was the truth of her stolen childhood, the proof of a world that forced her into roles she could not carry. And until someone listened, until someone cared, that truth would remain buried inside her, heavy, painful, and unspoken. Her body ached, fragile and unprepared. She was too young, too delicate, and too inexperienced for the burdens suddenly placed upon her. Every movement reminded her of the weakness inside her. Her bones were not strong enough, her frame too small to carry the weight of expectations. She should have been running through fields, playing with friends, and learning about the world. Instead, her body was being forced into responsibilities it wasn't ready for. The doctors could see it. They examined her carefully, and shook their heads with quiet concern. They whispered warnings in corners, their voices low but serious. They spoke of dangers, of complications that could come because she was still so young. They said her health might be at risk, that her body had not yet matured enough to handle what was being demanded of it. They used words like unsafe, early, and dangerous. These were not just opinions. These were facts, born from years of medical knowledge and experience. But their words fell into silence, crushed by something louder and more powerful: tradition. Tradition spoke not with whispers, but with authority. It did not care about her age, her body, or her pain. It only cared about appearances, honor, and rules that had been passed down for generations. Tradition said it was time. Tradition said this was her duty. Tradition said that no matter what the doctors thought, she had to endure. And so, the warnings of science were pushed aside. The elders shook their heads at the doctors' concerns. They said, "Our mothers and grandmothers went through the same. They survived, and so will she." They treated the risks as nothing more than fear, as if knowledge and medicine were unnecessary. To them, experience from the past was enough proof. They believed tradition was stronger than science, and that faith in old customs would carry her through. But she knew the truth in her own body. She felt the ache that would not go away. She felt the exhaustion in her bones, the weakness in her steps, and the fear deep in her heart. Her body screamed that it was not ready. Every day felt like a battle she was losing, and still, she was told to keep silent, to endure, to obey. The conflict between science and tradition raged around her, but she was the one caught in the middle. Doctors tried to save her, to protect her from harm, but their voices were ignored. Elders insisted that she continue, believing they knew best. And she, the one whose body and life were on the line, had no say at all. It was not just about health. It was about power. Tradition gave power to the elders, to the community, to the family's reputation. Science gave power to truth and reality, but it was a quieter power, one that many refused to hear. And so, even though the truth was clear, the louder voice won. Tradition drowned out the warnings, silenced the doctors, and demanded obedience. In the quiet of the night, she lay awake, wondering if she would survive. She thought about the doctor's warnings, the risks, the dangers, the possibility of death. These thoughts haunted her, but no one wanted to hear them. Instead, they told her to be brave, to trust in fate, to accept her role. They did not see the fear in her eyes or the pain in her body. They only saw what tradition told them to see, a girl fulfilling her duty. Her story was not unique. Across generations, countless girls had faced the same struggle. Many had suffered, some had died, but still, the cycle continued. Tradition was powerful because it was unquestioned. And every time someone tried to raise the voice of science, tradition shouted louder. The saddest part was that she wanted to live, not just survive, but truly live. She wanted to grow, to learn, to laugh freely without this heavy weight on her shoulders. But life had been stolen from her, traded for customs that did not care about her health or her happiness. Her body was fragile, unprepared, and crying out for help. The doctors saw the truth, but their warnings were whispers. Tradition, louder than bells, drowned them out. And in that silence, she remained trapped, a child forced to bear the burdens of adulthood, even when her very body was breaking under the strain. Her mother's eyes held sorrow. Behind them was a pain that had lived there for many years, a sadness she had never spoken aloud. When she looked at her daughter, she did not just see a child about to be married too young. She saw herself. She saw her own past reflected in her daughter's present, like a mirror showing her the wounds she had never healed. Her mother, too, had once been a little girl who dreamed of freedom, laughter, and days spent in play. But those dreams were cut short when she was forced into marriage long before she was ready. She remembered the day they dressed her in silks, calling her a bride while her hands still shook with fear. She remembered sitting in silence while others celebrated, her heart screaming for escape. She remembered the heavy weight of expectation pressing down on her tiny shoulders. Girlhood had been stolen from her, just as it was now being stolen from her daughter. The game she wanted to play, the lessons she wanted to learn, the carefree moments of childhood she should have had, all of it had been taken from her in the name of tradition. She had been robbed of innocence, of choice, of freedom. And though the years had passed, the wound had never closed. When she looked at her daughter, all of those memories came rushing back. She wanted to stop it. She wanted to protect her child from the same fate, to say no to the elders, to shield her from the pain that had marked her own life. But she did not speak. She could not speak. Her voice was bound by silence, tied by the chains of culture, fear, and obedience. Silence was the language she had been taught since girlhood. Silence was the rule for women in her world. She had been told never to question, never to resist, never to raise her voice against decisions made by elders. And so, even though her heart broke, she swallowed her words. She let her daughter be led down the same path she had walked. The silence was not born of agreement, but of helplessness. She knew the cost of breaking tradition. A woman who protested would be shamed, ridiculed, or cast aside. Her voice would not be celebrated, it would be punished. She feared for her daughter, but she also feared for herself. And so, silence became her shield, a painful, heavy shield that kept her trapped in the same cycle she wished to end. There was another sorrow in her eyes, too. Guilt. She knew she was passing on the same suffering she had endured. She had once wished that no girl would ever go through what she had gone through. She had once dreamed of breaking the chain. But when the moment came, when her daughter's future was placed before her, she could not change it. Her silence allowed the cycle to continue. She held her daughter's face in her hands and forced a smile, but inside she was breaking. She wanted to say, "I know your fear. I know your pain. I once felt it too." She wanted to promise her daughter that everything would be all right, but she knew those words would be lies. Instead, she gave only a silent touch, a look filled with sorrow, hoping her daughter would understand the truth hidden behind her eyes. It was the cruelest part of all, the way pain moved from one generation to another, passed like an inheritance no one wanted. The mother had suffered, and now the daughter would suffer too. Not because the mother wished it, but because silence left her powerless. And so, bound by tradition, bound by fear, bound by silence, she let her daughter walk into the same stolen girlhood she once endured. Her mother's eyes told the story her lips could not, a story of loss, of longing, of a life that might have been different. A story of girlhood stolen too soon. A story of love too weak to fight against the strength of tradition. Her daughter may not have understood it in that moment, but one day, she too would look back and realize that sorrow had always been there, hidden in her mother's gaze. And thus, history repeated itself. One generation after another, daughters became brides before they became women. Mothers who had once been silenced passed on that silence to their children. And in the quiet sorrow of her mother's eyes lived the unspoken truth: nothing had changed. Friends her age were still in school, still chasing dreams. They woke up each morning with notebooks in their hands, laughter in their voices, and plans for the future written in their minds. They studied lessons, played in the schoolyard, and talked about what they wanted to become: doctors, teachers, writers, artists. Their eyes sparkled with hope, their days were filled with curiosity, and their nights were filled with stories and dreams that belonged only to them. But her life was different. While her friends carried books, she carried household responsibilities. While they solved math problems, she learned recipes in the kitchen. While they practiced speeches for class, she practiced silence in her husband's home. Her future was not her own. It was written by others, forced upon her without question or choice. She thought of her friends often, their laughter echoing in her memory. Sometimes, she would imagine herself sitting among them again, raising her hand to answer a question, or running with them in the field during a break. But then reality would return, heavy and unkind. The walls of her home closed around her, reminding her that childhood had ended too soon. Her friends still chased dreams, but she was told her only dream should be to serve. To serve her husband, to serve her in-laws, to serve the tradition that had stolen her freedom. She was told to be grateful, to see her place as honorable. But in her heart, she longed for more, not riches or fame, just the simple right to learn, to grow, to be young. The house she lived in felt less like a home and more like a cage. Every corner carried the weight of expectation. Every door opened only to more duties. And every window, instead of offering freedom, felt like a wall, a reminder that escape was impossible. She would sometimes stand by the window, watching the world outside. She could see children laughing, neighbors walking, people living freely. But for her, the window was only a frame through which she could view life she could not touch. It was cruel how the same glass that should have let in light and hope instead felt like a barrier. The sun came through, but it did not warm her heart. The breeze came through, but it did not free her spirit. The window showed her the world, but it also showed her distance, the distance between who she was and who she might have been. She asked herself questions in silence. Why me? Why did my friends get to dream while I was forced to give mine up? Why did their lives belong to them while mine belonged to others? But no answers came. Only the heavy truth that life was unfair, and that her girlhood had been traded for roles she did not choose. Her friends would one day graduate, wear gowns, and hold certificates in their hands. They would celebrate accomplishments, take pictures, and step into brighter futures. She would not be with them. By then, she might be carrying a child, cooking meals, or completing endless chores. The difference between their paths would only grow wider with time, and the sorrow of it weighed on her every day. And yet, deep inside her, the spark of those lost dreams still lived. She still thought about books, lessons, and the laughter of classmates. She still wondered what it might feel like to walk into a classroom again, to hold a pen instead of a broom, to write her own future instead of following one written for her. The spark was small, but it kept her alive. Every window that looked like a wall reminded her of the dreams beyond reach. But in her heart, she hoped that one day, maybe one of those walls would crack. Maybe one day, she would step outside and reclaim what was taken. Maybe one day, she would not only watch life from behind glass but live it freely, as she once dreamed to. For now though, she remained trapped. Her friends were still in school, still chasing dreams. She was in a house, bound by silence, where every window looked like a wall. And in that painful truth lay the story of her stolen youth. One night, she prayed aloud. Her voice was soft, trembling, almost unsure if anyone, human or divine, would hear her. She was alone in her room, the walls heavy with silence, her pillow still damp with tears from nights before. For so long, she had carried her pain quietly inside her heart, but that night it grew too heavy to bear. She lifted her face toward the dark ceiling and whispered words that came straight from her soul. God, let them see me, not as a wife, not as a child, but as a soul who is breaking. It was not the kind of prayer others taught her to say. They had told her to pray for patience, for obedience, for strength to serve. They told her to thank God for her husband, her home, and the duties placed upon her. But her prayer was different. It was raw, unpolished, desperate. It was the cry of a heart asking not for blessings, but for recognition. She wanted someone, anyone, to see her as more than a role. To her family, she was only a wife, someone meant to serve, to cook, to bear children. To society, she was just another girl who had fulfilled her duty by marrying young. To tradition, she was not even a person, just a part of an old system that had swallowed countless girls before her. But she was more than all of that. She was a human being with dreams, feelings, and wounds. She wanted to be seen, not for the mask she was forced to wear, but for the truth hidden underneath. Her words carried the weight of all the things she could not say to others. She could not tell her in-laws how heavy her chores felt. She could not tell her husband how afraid she was. She could not tell her mother how much she resented the silence that had allowed this fate. And so, in the quiet of the night, she spoke to God, the only one she believed might understand. Not as a wife, she whispered. Being called a wife felt like a chain. It erased the fact that she was still a child inside. People celebrated her marriage as if it were a gift. But to her, it was a cage. She wanted to be known for more than the title forced upon her. Not as a child, she added. Because even though she still felt like one, she knew the world refused to acknowledge it. They had taken away her toys, her school, her freedom, and told her she was now a woman. But inside, she still longed for her mother's embrace, for the laughter of friends, for the simplicity of being young. She wanted people to understand that just because she had been dressed as a bride did not mean she was ready for adulthood. But as a soul who is breaking. These words were the truest she had ever spoken. Her soul felt fragile, cracked from the weight of responsibilities she had not chosen. Every day pushed her closer to the edge of despair. The silence around her, the expectations, the loneliness, all of it was breaking her from within. She wanted someone to look past her outward appearance and see the suffering hidden behind her forced smiles. As she prayed, tears rolled down her cheeks. Her voice shook, sometimes too faint to hear even in the stillness of her room. But she kept speaking, because it was the only way she could survive the weight pressing down on her heart. Prayer became her release, the one place where she could speak freely without fear of judgment or punishment. She did not know if God would answer. She did not know if her prayer would change anything. But in that moment, it was enough to speak, to put her pain into words, to beg for someone to see her truth. She wanted to believe that somewhere, somehow, her voice mattered. That her tears were not invisible. That her soul, even in its breaking, was worth noticing. For a long time after, she sat in silence, her chest rising and falling as though she had poured out the last of her strength. The room was still the same, the house unchanged, the world outside no different. But in her heart, a small flame of hope flickered, the hope that one day, her prayer would be heard, not just by God, but by people too. And so, in that dark room, with no one but her sorrow to keep her company, a child forced into womanhood prayed not for riches, not for beauty, not for status. She prayed for something far simpler, far deeper, to be seen. Slowly, she realized her story wasn't just hers, it was the story of many girls, silenced before they could speak. For so long, she had thought her suffering was unique. She believed she was alone in her pain, trapped in a life that had stolen her childhood. But as time passed, as she listened to whispers from other women and remembered the stories her mother never told aloud, she began to understand that her wounds were not hers alone. Everywhere she looked, she began to see reflections of her own life in others. Her mother's sorrowful eyes had once carried the same pain. Her grandmother's silence had hidden the same broken dreams. Neighbors' daughters were pulled from their classrooms too early, dressed in bridal clothes before they had finished being children. In every community, the same pattern repeated itself. Girls with bright eyes and open hearts were bound into roles they did not choose, their voices muted by tradition and expectation. The silence was not accidental. It was taught. From the time they were little, girls were told not to question, not to protest, not to dream too loudly. They were told to obey, to accept, to sacrifice. If they cried, they were shushed. If they resisted, they were shamed. Their words were stolen before they could even form into sentences of defiance. And so, generation after generation, the same silence grew deeper, like an inheritance passed from mother to daughter. She realized now that her life was part of a larger story, a story of girlhood stolen, of futures rewritten, of souls broken too early. The pain she carried in her heart was the same pain carried by countless others. And in this realization came both comfort and sorrow. Comfort because she was not alone. Sorrow because it meant the injustice was greater than she had ever imagined. She remembered the little girls she used to play with. Some were already mothers now, their eyes older than their years. Some had disappeared into marriages that swallowed their laughter. None of them had been asked what they wanted, what they dreamed of, or who they hoped to become. They had all been silenced before they could truly speak. The more she thought about it, the more clearly she saw the cruelty of it all. A girl's voice should have been her strength, her bridge to the world, her way of shaping her future. But in their society, a girl's voice was treated like a danger, something to be muted before it grew too strong. Dreams were cut short, education was denied, and choices were taken away, all to keep the silence in place. And yet, despite the silence, she knew there was power hidden in their shared pain. If so many girls carried the same story, then their silence was not weakness but proof of endurance. They had survived in a world that tried to erase them. They had continued to live, even when their voices were stolen. The weight of their silence was heavy, but within it was a strength waiting to rise. She began to dream differently now. Not just for herself, but for all the girls who had been silenced. She dreamed of a day when they could speak without fear. A day when their childhoods would not be stolen. A day when mothers would no longer have to pass on the sorrow of silence to their daughters. Her prayer at night changed. She no longer prayed only for her own freedom. She prayed for every girl whose tears went unseen, for every soul breaking quietly behind walls, for every child forced to grow too soon. She prayed that their voices would one day join together and become so loud that tradition could no longer ignore them. The realization gave her a new kind of strength. She was still trapped, yes. Her life had not suddenly changed. But she now knew that her suffering had meaning beyond herself. She was part of a larger truth, part of a shared story that stretched far beyond her home and her time. And knowing this, she refused to let her pain be silent forever. Slowly, she realized her story wasn't just hers. It was the story of countless girls. And though their voices had been stolen, the truth of their pain still existed, waiting for the day it would finally be spoken aloud. She wasn't ready for womanhood, but they pushed her into marriage. She was still a child, her hands small and her heart unprepared for the responsibilities placed upon her. She still dreamed of playing, of learning, of laughing freely with friends. Her body had not yet grown strong enough, and her mind had not yet discovered who she wanted to be. But tradition did not wait for readiness. The elders decided, and she was given away as a bride. No one asked her what she wanted. No one asked if she understood what marriage meant. To them, her silence was consent. To them, her tears were nothing more than nerves. They believed they were doing the right thing, protecting family honor, following customs. But for her, it was a theft. They stole her childhood, her innocence, and her chance to grow into herself. She was forced into a role that belonged to someone older, someone prepared, but she was neither. Her voice had been buried. Every time she wanted to speak, she was told to stay quiet. When she asked questions, they were ignored. When she expressed fear, she was told to be strong. Soon, she stopped trying. She swallowed her words and carried her silence like a heavy stone inside her chest. It became easier to obey than to fight, easier to pretend than to resist. The world around her left no room for her truth. But silence did not erase her pain. It grew inside her, pressing against her heart until she could no longer hide it. Her days were filled with chores and expectations, her nights with tears that soaked her pillow. She smiled when others looked, because that was what a bride was supposed to do. But when she was alone, the weight of it all crashed down. Every smile became a mask, every silence a wound. Her pain became her truth. It was the one thing she could not deny, the one thing that refused to disappear no matter how hard she tried to bury it. She could not ignore the ache in her body, too young for the demands placed upon it. She could not ignore the fear in her heart, too fragile to carry the weight of adulthood. She could not ignore the loneliness of being unseen, unheard, and unprotected. At first, she thought this truth belonged only to her. She believed she was the unlucky one, the girl who had been singled out by fate. But as time passed, she began to see that her story was not unique. Her mother had lived the same fate, her friends were living it, and countless other girls had walked the same path. Their voices had been buried too, but their pain, just like hers, lived on as undeniable truth. And once she recognized it, she realized that truth could no longer be ignored. No matter how much people silenced her, no matter how much tradition tried to erase her feelings, the truth remained. It lived in her eyes, in her trembling hands, in the sorrow that never left her heart. It lived in the quiet tears that so many chose not to see. Truth has a way of breaking through silence. It may not be spoken aloud, but it lingers, it haunts, it demands to be acknowledged. And her truth was clear: she had been forced into womanhood too soon. She had been denied the freedom of childhood. She had been robbed of choice. That truth weighed heavily not just on her, but on everyone who dared to look closely enough to see. Sometimes, she prayed that one day her truth would reach others, that it would break the walls of tradition and force people to listen. She prayed that girls like her would no longer have to bury their voices. She prayed for freedom, for recognition, for change. Until then, her silence remained, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with a truth so powerful it could not be erased. She wasn't ready for womanhood, but they pushed her into marriage. And though her voice had been buried, her pain became her truth, a truth too heavy, too real, and too powerful to be ignored forever.